Once again, the grass versus turf question has popped up here and been a big point of conversation following Aaron Rodgers' Achilles injury sustained last night, with people saying that if this had happened on a grass field, it wouldn't have been the same result. I disagree, and I'm going to tell you why in this video. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal in this channel is to help teach you about the medical side of the sports world. And in this video, we're going to dive into this whole grass versus turf conversation as it relates to Aaron Rodgers, because I do not think that we can blame the turf for his injury. This was the play. It's of course been confirmed an Achilles rupture. Rodgers plants with that left foot into the turf. His ankle is dorsiflexed, meaning his toes are pointed upwards. That puts the Achilles under an eccentric load, meaning he's trying to fire the Achilles in the gastroc while it's being stretched in this dorsiflexed position. And then we see the snap and we see the rupture. This is bringing back this whole argument of turf versus grass. And I think we just have to back up, because this whole conversation of which is safer, turf versus grass, all comes down to primarily these older school, like the AstroTurf, artificial turf, which I think there's no doubt in my mind did have higher risk, but it wasn't because of the ground being soft versus hard. I think a lot of people have said, well, in this case with Rodgers, if it were grass, it would have been softer. And so some of that energy would have been dissipated into the field and not gone up and caused his Achilles to rupture. There's nothing about the firmness of this field, soft or hard, compared to real grass that would influence this type of question. Unless Aaron Rodgers is Thanos secretly, he's not pushing down on the turf hard enough to cause even grass to give way that's going to make a difference in not causing this Achilles that's loaded in this eccentric position, probably with some degenerative pathology given his age, to not rupture. The real question about turf versus grass is because of the friction on old school artificial turf compared to the friction on grass. If you step on an old school artificial turf field and you try and rub your foot back and forth, you're going to have increased friction. When you have increased friction and you cut, pivot, change direction, there's more of a tendency for that foot to get anchored into the ground when there's increased friction, which then transmits more force up through the leg, in through the joint to something like the ACL. On grass, traditionally, there's going to be less of that stick, less of that friction, and so more subtle give, more ability for basically the ground to absorb some of that shift and impact and not have your foot as anchored into the turf, thereby not distributing as much force up through the leg, up into the knee. So this argument of artificial turf versus grass really comes down to how much the friction of the surface plays into how forces are being transmitted up through the joints into the body. But then of course we all remember what happened at the Super Bowl when the field was slicker. Everybody was slipping and sliding around, and it caused more issues than everybody complained. So we can't really have it both ways. We can't have a field that is grass and then therefore slicker to reduce the friction and the injury risk, but then still have enough traction to where guys aren't slipping and falling around and players aren't getting upset because they don't have any grip on the field. This is a sport where guys are cutting, pivoting, changing direction on a dime, and so you need that level of friction on the field to allow the competitiveness, to allow that performance of their sport. Otherwise, if everything is grass and slippery, which is theoretically better for injuries, you end up with things like this, where people are slipping around because there's no friction to maintain that contact. So that's the trade-off between this question of, well, we should put grass fields in. You're going to get people slipping around more, and people aren't going to be able to cut, pivot, and do their sport, even though it may overall have a better impact on just overall injuries. Specifically with Rodgers here, so if we look at when his foot is anchored into the ground, at this point where that calf is eccentrically loaded, there's nothing to do with how his foot is slipping or sliding that's going to change how much his calf is trying to eccentrically fire and then lead to the rupture. And plus, we just saw J.K. Dobbins tear his Achilles in essentially the exact same fashion, playing on a natural grass field. And so we can't sit here and say that the turf caused or contributed majorly to Rodgers' injury when, number one, we just saw a similar mechanism happen where you can even see how it looks like his foot probably slid a little bit here because of that decreased friction, but still you go into that same degree of dorsiflexion to then load eccentrically the Achilles in the same fashion, to where I truly don't think it's going to have a difference. And it's not just my opinion, there's data on this. This is a paper that looked at Achilles tendon ruptures in the NFL from 2009-10 to 2016-2017, and they found in their conclusion down here no significant difference between Achilles tendon rupture rates and playing surfaces in games. And so there's data to back up that there's no influence on Achilles tendon ruptures and playing surface, and I don't think we can look at what happened with Rodgers and say that it would have made a significant difference. If we look at other injuries, things like ACL tears, potentially ankle sprains, etc., then yes, we might find some difference. but you can't just lump everything together into this question of turf versus grass. You have to look at the specific injuries, the specific mechanism, and what's happening at a biomechanic level to really say if there's going to be an influence. And we've got two examples here, one rupture on turf, one rupture on grass, and we've got data to back up that there's no difference with Achilles tendon rupture rates in the NFL between playing surfaces. And again, it's just that question of how much slicker do you want to make the field? But obviously nobody wants to play at a high level on a super slippery surface. And so people are trying to balance the line between a surface that's not sticky enough to cause increased injury rates, but also is just sticky enough to not cause people to slip and slide around. And I think with these newer turf fields that we're seeing, those injury rates are lower compared to historically the old things like the AstroTurf, which were a lot stickier, a lot more friction. And so again, I think, yes, it's an important conversation. I think grass fields, if I could have a choice between the two, sure, it's better in an ideal day on an ideal condition when there's not a lot of rain. But when we start getting into how you actually affect playing performance, I think grass fields, if I could have a choice between the two, sure, it's better in an ideal day on an ideal condition when there's not a lot of rain. But I don't think it's as simple as looking at an injury like Rodgers and saying, oh my goodness, this argument of turf versus grass. Turf contributed to Rodgers' injury, and it wouldn't have happened had he not been playing on turf, because I think this injury happens whether he's on grass or turf. It wouldn't have made a difference. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.